George Soros sits in his Manhattan office watching British Chancellor Norman Lamont on television declaring, "We will crush the speculators who attack the pound." What Soros does in the next 8 hours doesn't just prove the Chancellor wrong. It destroys the Bank of England's credibility, costs Britain £27 billion, and makes Soros $1.5 billion in a single day. But you haven't seen the biggest shock yet. The 16th of September 1992, Wednesday morning, the Quantum Fund offices occupy 2 floors of a gleaming Manhattan tower overlooking Central Park. Trading screens flicker with numbers that represent fortunes won and lost. The air buzzes with tension because George Soros has been building the largest currency bet in history. $10 billion against the British pound. A position so massive it could bankrupt his fund if he's wrong. A position that requires him to be right about something the entire British government insists is impossible. Soros stands at the window, 62 years old, thin frame, wire-rimmed glasses, hands clasped behind his back. He looks like a philosophy professor, not a financial predator. Born in Budapest during Nazi occupation, survived the Holocaust by forging documents, fled communist Hungary with nothing but brilliance and determination, came to London with no connections, no money, just ideas about how markets really work, ideas the establishment dismissed as foreign nonsense. Now he's about to prove who understands reality and who lives in fantasy. 3 weeks before this moment, Soros had walked the streets of London, not for meetings with government officials or bank executives. He came to feel the economic reality that statistics couldn't capture. He talked to shopkeepers in East London, listened to construction workers in pubs, visited mortgage brokers in suburban offices, asked simple questions. How's business? Are people spending? Can families afford their house payments? The answers told him everything the government statistics were hiding. Small businesses were cutting staff, mortgage applications had collapsed, retail sales were plummeting. Real people were already being crushed by the economic policies designed to defend the pound. That's when Soros knew Britain would have to choose between saving their currency and saving their economy, and democracies always choose to save their economy, eventually. At 9:30 a.m. London time, Norman Lamont steps to the podium at number 11 Downing Street, Chancellor of the Exchequer, Oxford-educated, proper accent, tailored suit, the embodiment of British financial authority. Behind him stand advisors from the Bank of England, the Treasury, Goldman Sachs, the best minds in British finance, all confident they can defend their currency against foreign speculators who dare challenge the might of the British Empire. Lamont's voice carries across the Atlantic via satellite feed. "Let me be absolutely clear," he declares, staring directly into the camera. "Her Majesty's government will defend the pound sterling at any cost. We have unlimited resources. We will raise interest rates as high as necessary. We will buy pounds until the speculators surrender. They will be crushed." The press conference is broadcast live on BBC, CNN, Reuters. Financial markets worldwide watch as the British government draws a line in the sand. This is more than economic policy. This is about pride, prestige, the credibility of a nation that once ruled the seas. The message is clear. Britain will not be bullied by foreign hedge funds. But there was something they didn't know yet. In Manhattan, Soros turns to his chief trader, Stanley Druckenmiller. "Did you hear that? The Chancellor just told us exactly how to destroy them." Druckenmiller looks confused. He said they have unlimited resources. He said they'll raise rates as high as necessary. But Britain's economy is already in recession. They joined the European exchange rate mechanism at an unsustainable level. The pound is overvalued by 20%. Defending it requires keeping interest rates high enough to attract foreign capital. But high interest rates will kill their domestic economy. Soros points at economic data. Look at their fundamentals. GDP growth, negative. Inflation, falling. They're trying to maintain an artificial exchange rate their economy cannot support. It's like holding a beach ball underwater. The pressure builds until something breaks. Right at this point, everything changed. "How big do we go?" Druckenmiller asks. "Double it. 20 billion. Make it the largest currency bet ever made." 20 billion? That's more than our entire fund. Stanley, when you see a bubble ready to burst, you don't nibble around the edges. The British government is fighting economic gravity. Gravity always wins. But you won't believe this detail. At 10:15 a.m., Druckenmiller begins executing the trades, selling pounds by hundreds of millions. Each trade appears on screens at banks worldwide. Currency dealers see the volume, realize someone with enormous resources is betting against Britain. Word spreads through dealing rooms in New York, London, Tokyo. Other hedge funds smell blood in the water. The selling accelerates. Not just Soros now. Julian Robertson's Tiger Fund joins the attack. Paul Tudor Jones adds his position. Michael Steinhardt throws his weight behind the trade. What started as one man's bet becomes a coordinated assault by the world's most sophisticated investors, all betting that the Bank of England doesn't understand the mathematics of their own economy. In London, Bank of England traders watch their screens with growing alarm. Pound sales accelerating beyond anything they've seen. Price dropping despite their massive intervention. They're buying pounds faster than ever, but supply seems infinite. Like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in the bottom. Governor Robin Lee Pemberton calls an emergency meeting. The bank's foreign exchange reserves are being drained at unprecedented speed. They're buying pounds at a rate of £3 billion per hour. At this pace, they'll exhaust Britain's entire currency reserves by evening. Who's leading this? Lee Pemberton demands. Reports indicate George Soros, his chief trader responds. Quantum Fund, estimated position now exceeding $15 billion. Lee Pemberton knows that name. Hungarian refugee turned billionaire. The man who identified the Japanese real estate bubble before anyone else. The investor who spotted the collapse of the Soviet Union 3 years early. Someone with an uncanny ability to see reality through institutional delusions. $15 billion. He's betting his entire fund plus massive leverage against the pound. It appears so, Governor. And others are following his lead. Wait a minute. Don't miss this detail. At 11:30 a.m., Lamont raises interest rates from 10% to 12%. An emergency increase signaling desperation. Soros watches with satisfaction. Perfect. They just proved our point. They're so desperate they're willing to destroy their economy. Increase our position. We're already at $18 billion, Druckenmiller protests. They just raised rates to 12% in a recession. That's economic suicide. They're bluffing with their citizens' livelihoods. We're calling their bluff. What you're seeing now is nothing compared to what happens next. By noon, other major investors join the attack. Julian Robertson's Tiger Fund, Paul Tudor Jones. Even British institutions begin hedging. The pound is under assault from every direction. Bank of England reserves drain at £3 billion per hour. They're fighting a battle they cannot win. But political pressure prevents surrender. At 2:15 p.m., Lamont announces another emergency rate increase, from 12% to 15%, the highest interest rates in British history. Soros receives the news while eating lunch, doesn't look up from his sandwich. 15% in a recession? They've lost their minds. That proves the pound is finished. Should we cover our position? Druckenmiller asks. Absolutely not. This is the climax. They're about to capitulate. But the truly shocking part happens at 7:40 p.m. London time. Robin Lee Pemberton sits surrounded by exhausted advisors. The Bank of England has spent £27 billion defending the pound, more than any central bank ever spent in a single day. Their reserves are nearly exhausted. Governor, we cannot continue. At current volumes, we'll be bankrupt by midnight. Lee Pemberton closes his eyes, about to preside over the greatest monetary defeat in British history, defeated by a Hungarian refugee with a calculator. At 7:40 p.m. precisely, the Bank of England releases a 3-sentence statement that will echo through financial history. Her Majesty's government has decided to suspend the pound's membership in the European exchange rate mechanism. Interest rates will return to previous levels immediately. Currency markets will determine the pound's appropriate value. Capitulation. Complete and total surrender. The statement reaches trading floors within seconds. Reuters flashes the news globally. In Manhattan, Soros's phone rings immediately. Druckenmiller's voice carries across the office, loud enough for everyone to hear. They surrendered. We won. Profit estimate, $1.5 billion. The trading room erupts. Everyone stops working. Complete silence, then spontaneous applause. They've just witnessed the largest single-day profit in investment history. But Soros shows no emotion. No celebration. No victory dance, just nods calmly, as if the outcome was never in doubt. "Of course we won," he says quietly to Druckenmiller. "I told you this morning, when the premise is false, reality always wins." They tried to defend an indefensible position. Mathematics defeated politics. What nobody expects happens 3 hours later. Soros's private line rings at his Manhattan apartment. He's just finished dinner with his wife. The voice is crisp, educated, unmistakably British. "Mr. Soros, this is Norman Lamont, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the man who 8 hours earlier had promised to crush speculators, now calling the most successful speculator in history." "Chancellor," Soros replies carefully, surprised by the call. "I assume this conversation is not being recorded." "No recordings, Mr. Soros. I'm calling from my personal mobile. I have a question for you, and I hope you'll give me an honest answer." Soros waits, curious about what the defeated Chancellor wants to know. "When did you know we would fail?" Lamont asks, his voice carrying exhaustion and genuine curiosity. "What was the moment you realized Britain couldn't defend the pound?" Soros considers offering some polite diplomatic response. Instead, he chooses truth. "Chancellor, I knew you would fail the moment you announced unlimited resources, because that told me you didn't understand the fundamental problem you were facing." "I don't follow," Lamont says. "You believed this was about money, about having enough reserves to outlast the speculators. But it wasn't about money, it was about mathematics. Your exchange rate was mathematically wrong. Your interest rate policy was economically suicidal. Your entire approach was built on a foundation that couldn't support the weight you were placing on it." Silence on the line as Lamont processes this. Soros continues, "Chancellor, imagine trying to build a house on quicksand and wondering why it keeps sinking no matter how much concrete you pour into the foundation. The problem isn't insufficient concrete, the problem is building on quicksand." "And we were building on quicksand," Lamont says quietly. "You were defending an exchange rate that required keeping British interest rates higher than British businesses could survive. That's not a currency policy. That's economic suicide with extra steps. No government can maintain those conditions indefinitely without destroying their domestic economy." The conversation lasts 23 minutes. Lamont asks detailed questions about market mechanisms, currency dynamics, the relationship between domestic economic policy and exchange rate stability. Questions that reveal how little the British government understood about the forces they were trying to control. Years later, Lamont will write in his memoirs that this conversation taught him more about international finance than his entire Oxford education. That a Hungarian refugee with a philosophy degree understood British economics better than British economists with generations of institutional knowledge. You haven't seen the biggest surprise yet. The next morning, every major newspaper in the world carries the same story. British newspapers declare September 16th, Black Wednesday. The Financial Times runs the headline, "Pound collapses, despite £27 billion defence." The Guardian asks, "How did one man defeat the Bank of England?" The pound drops 15% overnight, its largest single-day decline in modern history. Norman Lamont holds a press conference at 10 a.m. His tailored suit looks rumpled. His characteristic confidence has evaporated. Dark circles under his eyes suggest he didn't sleep. He stands at the same podium where 12 hours earlier he had promised to crush the speculators. "Yesterday's events were unfortunate," he begins, then pauses, visibly searching for words that don't exist. How do you explain that a foreign investor understood British economics better than the British government? How do you admit that your entire economic strategy was mathematically impossible? A reporter from the BBC asks the question everyone wants answered. "Chancellor, how did George Soros defeat the entire British financial establishment?" Lamont's answer reveals the depth of his misunderstanding. "Mr. Soros had unlimited resources to attack our currency. We had limited resources to defend it. But that wasn't true, and Soros knows it. Britain could have printed pounds indefinitely to defend their currency. What Soros had wasn't unlimited resources. What he had was something more powerful than money. He understood that political promises cannot override economic reality indefinitely. The human cost becomes clear within weeks. British families see mortgage payments spike. Small businesses face bankruptcy. The very people the government claimed to protect suffer the most from its failure. But something unexpected happens 6 months later. The British economy begins its longest growth period in modern history. Interest rates drop to levels that help businesses and families. The catastrophe everyone feared never materializes. 3 months later, Soros agrees to a rare interview. Simple, he explains. They were defending the wrong thing. They thought they were defending the pound. Actually, they were defending their pride. Pride is expensive. But didn't you feel guilty? Your actions cost British taxpayers billions. I didn't cost them anything. Their government's delusions cost them billions. I simply provided the market mechanism that revealed those delusions. What happened next changed everything. The aftermath ripples through decades. Britain eventually abandons fixed exchange rates. The Euro project proceeds without British participation. Soros becomes the man who broke the Bank of England. But there was something else the media missed. 5 years later, Soros reveals the real story wasn't about currency speculation, it was about institutional delusion. The British government believed their own propaganda. They convinced themselves that willpower could overcome mathematics. He continues, I didn't defeat the Bank of England. Economic reality defeated the Bank of England. I was simply the messenger, but nobody expected what happened next. On Black Wednesday evening, Soros received an unexpected call. Mr. Soros, this is Norman Lamont. When did you know we would fail? Lamont asked. Soros chose truth. Chancellor, I knew you would fail the moment you announced unlimited resources, because that told me you didn't understand the problem. You believed this was about money, but it wasn't about money. It was about mathematics. Your exchange rate was wrong. Your entire economic policy was built on a foundation that couldn't support the weight. The conversation lasted 23 minutes. Lamont asked detailed questions about market mechanisms, questions no British politician had bothered asking. 6 months later, the British economy began its longest period of sustained growth in modern history. The catastrophe everyone feared never materialized. Instead, Britain experienced exactly what Soros predicted: economic relief. In 1995, Norman Lamont published an op-ed in the Financial Times titled, Why George Soros Was Right. He wrote, Black Wednesday was not Britain's defeat. It was Britain's liberation from an economic policy slowly strangling our domestic economy for the sake of international prestige. 25 years later, economics professors worldwide teach Black Wednesday as the definitive lesson about fighting market forces. Students learn that central banks can influence currency values temporarily, but cannot permanently maintain artificial exchange rates that contradict economic fundamentals. In 2008, during the global financial crisis, Soros was asked by a congressional committee whether he saw similarities between Black Wednesday and the housing bubble. Absolutely, he responded. Same psychological pattern. Institutions defending positions that mathematical analysis proved were unsustainable, banks insisting housing prices could never fall nationally, rating agencies maintaining that mortgage securities were safe investments. Everyone knew the numbers didn't add up, but admitting that would have required acknowledging that trillions of dollars in investments were worthless, so they defended the indefensible until reality intervened. Someone always profits when institutions refuse to acknowledge reality. Delusion always creates profit opportunities for anyone willing to do the mathematics. That's the question haunting institutional leaders worldwide. How long can you afford to defend the indefensible? Because George Soros is still out there, still analyzing, still waiting for the next institution to bet against reality. The pattern never changes. Institutions convince themselves that this time is different, that willpower can overcome mathematics, and somewhere George Soros is calculating when their resources will run out. So here's the question for your life. What pound are you defending? What unsustainable position are you maintaining through sheer willpower? What economic reality are you ignoring because acknowledging it threatens your pride? Your business model that worked before COVID but doesn't work now? Your career path that made sense 10 years ago but doesn't fit current markets? Because somewhere, there's a George Soros watching your delusion, someone calculating when your resources will run out. The Bank of England learned that lesson at a cost of £27 billion in 8 hours. How much will yours cost you? And more importantly, are you brave enough to do the mathematics yourself, Or will you wait for someone else to do it for you? The choice is always yours. Reality is always patient, but reality always wins, and the cost always compounds. That's what George Soros understood on the 16th of September 1992, when he made history by simply refusing to ignore what everyone else chose not to see. If this story made you think differently about the difference between confidence and delusion, hit that like button, subscribe for more stories about the moment when reality meets wishful thinking. And comment below, what's something everyone knows is true that might actually be a costly delusion waiting to be exposed?